Right, I'm still going to talk about the late Robert Maxwell, but this is part 2. What you heard before was part 1.
I've divided it into 3 episodes.
Right. This is going through the book itself. It was my late brother Nicky who introduced me to Robert Maxwell in June 1968. The latter was giving a birthday party at Headington Hill Hall, where he lived. Nicky is dead now. We were very close. Bob asked Nicky to bring any siblings who were in the country. My siblings were all out of the country, so the only person Nicky brought was me, together with his really weird girlfriend, whose name was Anne de Chauvigny. She was bizarre, but I think quite pretty. He was absolutely besotted by her. When she danced with Bob, she flirted with him, probably only because he was a millionaire. When she flirted with him, Nicky and I were absolutely furious. Nicky was then the financial correspondent of the Daily Telegraph, and he kept ringing Robert Maxwell up and saying, "Mr. Maxwell, what are you doing about your overdraft?" When I met Bob, it was infatuation at first sight. He allowed me to dance in his arms, and when I asked him for the names of his children, he rattled them all off smiling. I could tell he was very proud of them, and I could also tell he had taken a liking to me. He was a ravishingly good-looking man. He pointed to a swimming hut next to a sauna. He told me to put on a bathing suit. I deliberately put on a very tight bathing suit. He asked me if I could swim. Then he picked me up and threw me into the swimming pool. He was wearing a white bath towel dressing gown and was chewing an unlit cigar. He stood by the edge of the swimming pool and watched me swim around. As I got out, I met Bob's wonderful wife, Betty, who pushed a hot sausage into my mouth. What a superb lion of a man, thought I, and what a resplendent rose of a woman. Although I began to love Betty very much and confided in her, I found that Bob's sexual chemistry was such that I sometimes fainted when I saw him, particularly on hot days. I frequently met Bob through Nicky, who asked my mother if he could invite Bob to our house to ask him why he wanted to buy the News of the World. "We can't have him this Sunday," said my mother. "The cook, Adelaide Jesus, has had to go to Barbados to attend a funeral. All we've got is Doris, who is only capable of boiling an egg. We can't possibly give Robert Maxwell a boiled egg for lunch. He's so peculiar and sensitive, he might totally misconstrue the situation." Bob came to lunch with us the following Sunday. I sat next to him, and he drew me into the conversation. Somehow, the subject of politics came up. "She's a communist," my mother told him. "Not only that, she's joined the Communist Party." I had joined the Communist Party in order to annoy my mother, who had an extremely dogmatic personality. My mother continued, "Eleanor reads the Daily Worker in my Mayfair hairdresser." The hairdressers dropped their combs in disgust. Also, she takes flowers to the Russian embassy on Lenin's birthday. I have an awful lot to put up with. I could tell that Bob was impressed. Shortly before he had come to lunch, I had arranged to meet my mother in Aldo Bruno's, an upmarket hairdresser's in Mayfair. Among other newspapers, I was carrying the Daily Worker under my arm. "Where did you get this?" my mother asked. "I bought it," I said, my voice raised. "Why did you buy it?" "Because I like it." "Why do you like it?" my mother asked unwisely. "Why? I like its contents, I like its editorials, and I like its reasoning." "I can see she won't be coming here again," said Aldo Bruno. He was the owner of the salon, and he spoke extremely disagreeably, I thought. After lunch, I showed Bob the garden. He liked flowers. He asked me what languages I spoke. "French and Russian," I replied, adding, "My parents won't allow me to have Russian lessons, so I taught myself Russian." Bob spoke to me in Russian. He was impressed, and he very kindly sent me the Pergamon Russian course tapes as a present. He and I had become extremely close friends. It was in the late 60s that there was some ominous talk about another airport being built in Buckinghamshire, and pressure was being put on him to be more vehement in his public speeches and to condemn the airport. Trees scattered all over Buckinghamshire were covered with drawings of livid, violent-looking farmers brandishing pitchforks. Nicky told my family how much I enjoyed Bob's company. My father, who had a country house in Buckinghamshire, was concerned about this airport. I had always been close to my late father, who was stern as well as being kindly, hard-working and good-humoured. He was also very stubborn. Once he got an idea into his head, he stuck to it like a terrier with a rubber boot in its mouth. This I attribute to the fact that he was a Welshman. He and I were sitting in the dining room after dinner. My mother had gone to watch television. "I know all about you and Bob Maxwell," said my father. "You talk as if there has been some impropriety between us," I said. "Why did you say that?" "I didn't mean that," said my father assertively. "The reason I mention this is due to something else altogether." "Is there some kind of problem?" I asked. "Yes, there is. It concerns this airport, which would mean that the whole of Buckinghamshire would be uninhabitable. To fight this airport, we need funds. So far, we haven't heard a word from Uncle Bob. If you like, I will go to Headington Hill Hall and see him tomorrow afternoon," I said. "How much do you need?" £5,000. "I'll ask him for £5,000 then. I know he'll pay if I ask him nicely." "Oh, so you're as close as that, are you?" asked my father suspiciously. "Why, no. I'll ring him up tomorrow morning and I'll invite myself to tea." The following morning I rang Headington Hill Hall. "Bob, is that you?" "Yes, Eleanor." I said, "I will be coming to tea with you this afternoon, if I may." I've got to use the bloody magnifying glass again, blast it. He liked me to be brash and assertive whenever I spoke. He said, "That's all right, pussycat. I'll tell everyone to expect you. Betty will be very pleased to see you again," he said. My father's driver was called Mr. Brightwell. He is dead now. He was a nice man, but he could be very peppery. He looked like a little gnome. I used to provoke him when I was a child by pouring gravel into his bowl of clean oil, which was to go into my father's car. "Where's Headington Hill Hall?" asked Mr. Brightwell. I gave him directions. Headington Hill Hall was about half an hour's drive away from my parents' house. "I understand you was only going to see these people for tea," said Mr. Brightwell on reaching Headington Hill Hall. He added, "I hope you're not going to dawdle. I missed Dad's army last week, and I'll be blowed if I'm going to miss it again." I saw some men talking at the bottom of the drive, just outside the house. I asked one of the men to take me to where Bob was standing. I felt a trifle shy when I saw him. When I am not entirely at ease, I bark. I said, "My father sent me here to ask you for £5,000. Who is your father and what does he want the money for?" Bob asked mildly. "For the anti-airport campaign." I raised my head and looked at his face once more. He was so good looking that I fainted. Someone took me into the house and put me to bed. Eventually I came round. The first person I saw was Betty. "What happened?" I asked. "There's no need to worry. You were outside in the drive with Bob. It was obvious you hadn't had anything to eat before you set out. Bob said you were cold and white before you fell, and that you weren't even wearing an overcoat. In the middle of March. Mon Dieu!" I then realized where I was and why I was there. I remembered that Mr. Brightwell had implored me not to be too long because he wanted to watch Dad's army. I told Betty this. Eventually I got up and went downstairs to the drawing room where there was a harp and a grand piano. The walls were covered with windows. The whole room radiated light. Bob was sitting down smoking a cigar. He handed me a sealed envelope. "This is for your dad," he said. "I'm so sorry you were taken ill. Now would you please take me to where your driver has parked his vehicle?" he said obscurely. I did as he asked. "What's your driver's name?" asked Bob. "Mr. Brightwell." And Bob said, "Mr. Lightweight, did you say?" And I laughed nervously. What the hell's so funny? Bob knocked on Mr. Brightwell's window. I must point out that he related more easily to women than to men. "You there, sitting in your vehicle, looking at pictures of naked women. What are you reading?" asked Bob peremptorily. An expression of rage clouded over Mr. Brightwell's face. I laughed again. "Mind your own flippin' business, sir." Bob ignored the remark. "I'd like you to come to my house and have tea with me and my wife." Mr. Brightwell was exceptionally irritated for some reason. He frantically took his cap off and put it on again. He put out his cigarette and I've got to use the magnifying glass. He put out his cigarette and hesitantly got out of the car. He walked slowly towards the house with his head lowered, as if he were walking behind his mother's hearse. Bob introduced him to Betty, who offered him some cakes, which she had made herself, and which he refused. He sat on the edge of an empire chair throughout tea without saying a word. "When does Dad's army start?" Betty asked Bob. "In about 15 minutes' time." "Good. I'd like to watch it. Eleanor said our guest likes it and would like to see it. You'll stay here and watch it with us, won't you, Mr. Brightwell?" said Bob. Mr. Brightwell appeared self-conscious, which was most unusual for him. "That's very kind of you, sir, but Eleanor's father will be wanting her back." On the way out, Bob took me aside. "Blimey, that driver of yours is a scary fellow. I wouldn't like to meet him alone on a dark night," he said. On the way home, I tried to break the stony silence. "What did you think of Mr. Maxwell, Mr. Brightwell?" I asked. "No comment," barked Mr. Brightwell. It was fairly late by the time I got home. My mother was changing for dinner. My father was waiting for me, sitting by the fire. "What took you so long?" he asked. "Bob is so ravishingly good-looking that I fainted. I had to be put to bed," I replied. Call Lubberduck, said my father, and he added, have you got the money? I passed the sealed envelope to my father. When he opened it, he was cross. This cheque is cheekily short of the £5,000 which I asked you to get from Uncle Bob, he said. For ethical reasons, I refuse to disclose what the cheque was made out for. Do enjoy your read.